All right, welcome everyone to our last day of the Working with Latin American Immigrants workshop. Today's session is Working with Undocumented Youth, and we are very excited to have with us today Rubi Franco Quiroz, who is from UndocuCarolina, which is an organization at UNC that works with undocumented students, and she will tell you all about the amazing work that they do here. Before we get started though, a couple of housekeeping notes, some Zoom etiquette reminders to please mute yourselves during the presentation so that everyone is able to hear. You can find that mute button in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Also, to improve internet connectivity for all, we're asking that you do turn off your video as well. You can see that in the bottom left-hand corner as well. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation that you don't want to forget, please write it down in the chat box and we'll be sure to address those during the Q&A session as well. A couple of workshop session notes. The session will be recorded and uploaded to the UNC-DUKE Consortium YouTube channel probably by next week. So if there's something you want to go back and review, or if you want to share this presentation with others in your building or in your organizations, you'll be able to send a link to them soon. And that all the presentations will be emailed to participants as well. So if there are some links that you want to explore, we will be sending out the presentation as well at a later time. I'm going to send it now to pass it along rather to Rubi, who is going to be hosting our session today. So thank you so much for being with us today, Rubi.
Thank you so much for having me, Corinne. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Wonderful. So good morning, everyone. My name is Rubi Franco Quiroz. I'm really excited to be hosting this session with you all today. I am one of the facilitators with UndocuCarolina, as Corinne mentioned, and today's session is all about learning how to work with undocumented youth. So to tell us a little bit, or tell you all a little bit about UndocuCarolina, we are this group that just got together from across campus. We are grad students, we are undergraduate students who also have a voice in this. We are admin directors within the university from different departments, and we just all gathered and really saw the need and the importance of being able to bring awareness to increase visibility and support and build more resources for our UNC undocumented members. And that includes both students and also our employees, you know, some of which hold DACA and were equally as impacted as our students. And many of also came from mixed status families that we really felt needed to be more seen on our campus and heard, and we wanted to raise awareness about the cause. So that is really what UndocuCarolina is all about. We were originally officially, I guess, created in 2018 as part of the UNC Humanities for Public Goods Critical Issues Grant on Migration and Mobility. And so with the support of this grant, we were able to create this UndocuCarolina organization that did a lot of trainings across campus, and we really tried to focus on bringing in the deans of the different admissions level folks that students interact with as they're applying to Carolina. So thinking from the shoes of a student as I'm applying, who are the people I come into contact with? And then how can we ensure that each of these departments are building resources to support our undocumented students? That was most of the work that we did in 2018. Then in 2019, in our second year, we focused mainly on expanding our network. Our ally trainings really took off. People were demanding like a higher level of trainings from different schools, and we started hearing from the School of Law and the School of Social Work, and we were only a group of, I think, 6 or 7, so we couldn't afford to be able to make all these trainings happen. And our second year mainly focused on creating our ally trainer network so that we could train the trainers and be able to expand our trainings across campus and our outreach. We kicked off and launched our website, which I can also send over for you all to check out. And it has a lot of great resources catered mostly to Carolina, but it's a great example of what different districts and even at an elementary, middle, and high school level of education it's a good model for people to see what are the kind of resources that students will need or families will need, because we, like I mentioned, also focused on what do our employees who are also undocumented, or our students whose parents are undocumented, what is the need there as well. All right, and so all of our trainings cover history, relevant legislation, and the current realities of undocumented community members. And we also always aim to create a network of allies across our campus, and that way students feel, and employees feel, or folks on our campus feel like they can go to someone at all times across our campus who isn't a true ally to them. And so today, a little bit of what we're going to do is we're going to identify and make a commitment to immigrant sensitive language. That's a big part of what I'm focusing on during this training. Also, becoming more aware of the resources available in your community, or the kind of resources that you all can build for your students, I think is really important to just kind of learn not only what's out there, but also what you yourself can make happen, because there's a lot of that, and a lot of people just, you know, sometimes don't know it, and that's okay. So today, my goal is for each of you to leave with at least one way that you feel you'll be able to support your undocumented students, or any undocumented family, because like I said, it may be the situation where your students may be US born citizens, but yet they still carry all of the same struggles that come with their parents being undocumented. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. So like I said, my name is Rubi Franco Quiroz. I graduated from Carolina in 2018, and now I'm pursuing my master's in social work at Carolina, and I'm doing the distance learning program. So it's a 3-year part-time program, and I work full-time for an ed tech company that builds resources to students in small rural areas across the country. So we bring them mentoring and tutoring services and a lot of different tech services directly to their phones. My passion is in activism. I was an activist, I would say, starting my sophomore year in high school. I came to the US when I was 6 years old, and my family well, my parents are still undocumented, but they are in the process of getting their residency right now, which has been a huge relief to our family. But I was myself undocumented for 17 years. And so I grew up through the US education system undocumented. And I'm going to kind of focus on that part of my story for this, because I think what I really want you all to take away is just the level and the possibility of impact that each of you have in working with students through education. I came to the US when I was 6, and that experience itself, I grew up in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, which is a really small border town right on the other side of McAllen, Texas. And growing up, I loved Mexico. My grandmother was my primary caregiver. Both of my parents worked a lot, and so I didn't see them as much. And my grandmother, I was just super attached to her. My family actually lived with my grandmother, so she raised me, and so she was a second mother to me, very much so. So coming to the US, I did not really understand. I knew what was happening. I was 6. My brother was 4 years old. My baby sister was 4 months old, and I knew what was happening. Like, I knew we were going to come here. I knew we were going to live here permanently, but I did not understand that coming here, I would not be able to go visit my family, or that it would be 17 years before I was able to see them again. So once that sort of settled in, and I started telling my parents, like, I want to go home, and they finally explained to me, like, we can't go home. That was really difficult for me. And just coming to the US at 6 years old, I did kindergarten in Mexico and jumped right into first grade here. I got here in August, so literally just jumped right into first grade. It was a huge culture shock. And I didn't know English. I struggled a lot with it. I struggled fitting in. I felt very much an outsider. I was always sitting like in the back of the room and had someone, like a volunteer, interpreting for me, but their Spanish was not very great. So then I struggled even understanding the interpreter sometimes. And it was a very difficult experience for me. It was not something that enjoy it. And so I literally made, I'm sure you've had students that like probably make up like, oh, I have stomach aches, you know, or a headache or whatever. I would make up all sorts of excuses to go home. And my uncle who lived with us at the time would go pick me up and say like, what did you make up today? You know, why are you getting sent home again all the time? And it was just part of me not just really not fitting in and not feeling welcomed. And I think I understood that my parents had done a lot to get me here, but I was confused as to why we were, you know, certain things were happening in my household. And so I remember my school, I got redistricted, which was great because I needed that fresh start. And towards the end of my first year, or towards the end of first grade, my mom sat me down and finally told me, you know, this is what you went through in coming here, but I never told you what I went through, you know, to come here so we could be with your dad, because my dad had came a year before us. And when my mom sat down and told me everything she faced to get us here, and really, you know, her experience, we were separated from her, so she crossed through the desert, and just hearing from her, the person who at the time, like my mom was my, you know, has always been my everything, it very much settled in that I remember thinking, okay, it is not acceptable for me to be anything less than extraordinary moving forward, just hearing my mom's experience. And also I felt like a little bit of guilt because I had to take care of my brother and sister during the 3 weeks that my mom like crossed into the US, and then she was actually detained and deported and she had to cross again. So, and we were already in the US. And so her feeling like I felt like I was letting you all down. Like, you know, I was ready to give up. And I thought like, I'm a horrible mother, you know, like my children are in the US, I have to do this again. And just kind of hearing everything she went through, it, to me, like my parents are the unsung heroes of my story. You know, I always talk about like all my accomplishments, the things I've been able to do, but none of it would be possible if it weren't for their ultimate sacrifice, right? And leaving their family behind and having to leave everyone and everything they ever had. And so I think I shared this with you all because then like I mentioned, I got redistricted and my mom told me her story, and I just remember thinking, okay, I've got to like get it together and really do good in school. And it was really hard. And I did end up placing out of ESL within like the first 2 years of redistricting to this new school. But it was because the adults around me, and I'll share this one story with Miss Medina. My parents were working full time over the summer, and we didn't have anyone to take care of us over the summer since we had just settled here from Mexico. And my uncle also worked, and my mom didn't know anybody here that she really trusted. And my brother's kindergarten teacher told my mom, like, I'll watch them over the summer as if they were in summer school. So just bring them to the school, and you know, I'll open up my classroom. My assistant will be here as well, and we'll help. Like, we'll watch them. You know, it's okay. And she just got really, she heard my mom's story. You know, I think my mom explained to her, you know, we don't have anybody here. And, you know, my little brother, she got like really, I guess she got a really special affection towards my little brother. And because of Miss Medina, like that's really why I was able to place out of ESL so quickly. She intentionally helped us that entire summer in all of the core subjects. And we'd go home and we'd just literally be like, okay, we got to do our workbooks for Miss Medina. Like we were so motivated in school, even beyond that summer, because of the impact that she had on our family. And so I'm not saying that you all have to do something, you know, huge like that, but just her ability to make us feel like she knew what we were facing and our struggles, and still cared for us the same as she did for every other student. And just also the way that she was very intentional to want to learn and understand, like, well, you know, why don't you all know anyone, or why did you come here from Mexico, and what brought you here? And her wanting to just get to know our family is what made it so that we were so dedicated to school and to wanting to do good. And we'd always say like, for Miss Medina, for Miss Medina. So I just share that because I think you all as educators have so much more power than maybe you think. And I think that the children you work for value you the most out of everyone that you probably come in contact to in your school districts and wherever you work. And I say that from personal experience. The intentionality is just matters so much. And so I'll stop there because I think I just spoke like way too much about myself. But now I'll talk to you all about inclusive language. So just kind of going along with this sense of how can you make students feel seen and valued equally, or understood even in their situation of being undocumented. And so I'll explain this, who is undocumented. So essentially a person who's undocumented is anyone that lives in the US that is a non-citizen, and they're in the US without authorization, in the form of a valid immigration status or legal presence, right? So like DACA is legal presence, for example. A lot of our students who are, well, now it's the wave that's just now graduating, a lot of them have DACA, right? Or perhaps someone who says, oh, my sibling has DACA, and we can talk about what that means. But this is often because they either entered without inspection or entered with a valid visa and overstayed the authorized duration of that status. So then that person becomes undocumented. And also, generally, undocumented individuals face a lot of just kind of, I would say, barriers and just walls in the US of things that perhaps because of the media or of social perception of undocumented people. And these things, these are some examples, obviously. So I'll go through them. Obviously, undocumented individuals, especially during this time right now, as we're seeing with the Trump administration being very openly anti-immigrant, they're facing a lot of imminent threat of detention and or deportation. So that would mean, like I gave the example of my mom came into the US at the same time that we did, but she was detained in McAllen, Texas, and then she was deported. So we were away from her. So she had to come back into the US again so that we could all be together. That's an example of what that detention and deportation looks like. They don't have permission to work unless they do have DACA, which then gives them a 2-year renewal, or they could be TPS holders. They could hold refugee status, but they don't have permission to work. If you're an undocumented person who doesn't have any of these permissions or any sort of legal presence, then you don't have permission to work. So oftentimes you see that in the parents of our undocumented students, or parents of US born citizens who came here on their own without their children. They cannot leave the United States and return. My mom came back, but she had to cross, again, illegally to come back into the US. And she couldn't just come through, customs and say, oh, hi, my children are in the US, so I got to get in here. They can't obtain a social security number, again, unless they have these very specific sort of programs. They qualify for these programs like TPS or DACA. And then they cannot obtain a driver's license in most states. There are some states that allow undocumented people to get or obtain driver's licenses, and unfortunately North Carolina is not one of them. And they're ineligible for most public benefits. So this is a big misconception. Undocumented people do not qualify for public benefits like food stamps, or I guess that would fall under EBT, Medicare, Medicaid, anything like that. They're ineligible. Like, you cannot apply. You need a social security to apply. And as I mentioned earlier, they're facing an unwelcoming political climate. We see that constantly, even in previous years. Every year, we always know immigration is used by both parties, either for or against, to kind of push their political agendas. And a lot of us in the activist movements of immigration and getting licenses for our parents, or in getting the DREAM Act passed for youth, we believe that immigration is a humanitarian crisis, yet it continues to be politicized for that exact reason, right? So that it can be used come every election cycle. So this term illegal, right? Let's talk about this. Most immigrants actually in our community, we disapprove of this term. I will be honest, whenever I'm around people and someone says like, oh yeah, even if they say like my parents are illegal, it automatically makes me like, oh, like cringe, it's because humans cannot be illegal. That is just not proper, right? It's not correct. It's not right. The actions, like I said, my mom came into the US illegally. Her action was illegal. The reason this is so important is because calling people illegal is a way of criminalizing undocumented people even further. So, you see this a lot in the media where they say like, oh yeah, the illegal alien. So it's just like even further taking away the humanitarian aspect of people coming into this country the way that they come into this country. And it's also not an easy thing. Like I explained to you all, my mom telling me her story, it just was the ultimate motivator for me, because I understood everything she faced and what she went through to get here. And so again, actions are illegal, human beings are not illegal. So in talking to your student, you want to think about, even if you just didn't know, you don't want to say something like, I understand your parents are illegal, because if I was told that as a student, and I was told that as a student in high school, in a situation I faced, in my history class, it automatically made me shut down, and it made me not even want to share more about myself with my teacher, because I automatically assumed they don't get it. They don't know. They can sit here and tell me, oh, I understand, or I feel for you, but they don't, and just the way they spoke about my family. So that's something that's really important to think about. And I think we see it so often in the media, we sometimes don't think about these things, but this is really important. So, you want to reflect on how could the use of this term impact your ability to genuinely provide services to your students, or genuinely build that relationship with your students, right? And then what other language could be used instead? Let's start using the term undocumented. That is what people are. If they're without authorization or without paperwork, they're undocumented. And so that's very widely used. It's starting to become more mainstream, which is great. So we want to contribute to that more positive, or removing ourselves from the criminalization of undocumented people. And so again, going along with the same theme, language of deservingness, we see this a lot, right? So this is a tweet I will read, and Ana Navarro Cardenas, a lot of people, she's very well known. A lot of people really idolize her and look up to her. So when she tweeted this, it's something we want to break down, right? Because we want to hold everyone to the same threshold. But she tweeted, Trump pardoned convicted racist who willfully broke law. Hope he shows empathy to dreamers who broke law through no fault of their own. Hashtag DACA. So this is, she's obviously in support of DACA, which is great. However, something like I shared my story so deeply with you all because I wanted to emphasize how, to me, my parents are truly the heroes of my story. So when we start saying things like, they were brought here by their parents, or we start framing it in the way of, oh, it's not their fault they were brought here, they didn't choose to come here, that places that blame on our parents, and it criminalizes our parents. And so we want to move away from that to a more humanitarian aspect of thinking, well, we need to show empathy to dreamers because they deserve the same rights as everybody else, just because they're in the US. They are now also US residents. They are also people that are part of our community. They're just part of our community. We don't want to say things like they contribute to our, all of this, but we want to just say, like, we believe in human rights altogether, and not just dreamers, for our parents as well. I actually always say, I think my parents are the OG original dreamers. So whenever I talk about dreamers, I'm including them in everything I speak of. I believe my parents should also not have to pay out-of-state tuition if they wanted to go back to school. I believe that they should also be able to get their driver's licenses, and they should be able to have a form of IDing themselves in our community, because it's really difficult to live a life where you're constantly in fear because you can't do that, right? And so moving on, continuing this theme. So this is done a lot. We see this poster babies of dreamers, right? The dreamer who was the valedictorian and gave the most inspirational speech at their high school graduation. And oh, this is the example of why dreamers should be able to get the Dream Act. This is why we need to protect dreamers. And so we want to say, obviously, it is a beautiful thing. We should absolutely highlight those stories, but we should also not make that the like we shouldn't make that the norm for why, like forcing every dreamer to have to be at this point to be able to deserve the same rights, right? We want to think about the students who simply are like, college is not for me and I can't, I want to work. I'm a person that needs to go into the workforce, or I want to do a quick, 2-year or like 6-month career path and then become a licensed nail technician, and so we want to emphasize the fact that no matter what path our students are taking, they deserve the same. They also deserve the DREAM Act. They also deserve to be able to have access to higher education as everyone else, even if it doesn't mean they're going to an Ivy League school on a full ride scholarship because they were like the valedictorian and had a 4.9 GPA, right? So just constantly making sure that we're keeping this in mind as you're working with your students, that whether they're the A+ student or they're the C student and they just need a little bit more guidance, that we're not telling them like, oh, you have to be perfect, because if you're not perfect, then there's no way you're going to be able to make it. And that's something that I very much grew up with. Like, I knew I had to absolutely bust my butt to be able to get into Carolina and to be able to be considered. And it wasn't even about getting into Carolina. It was about, how am I going to fund myself? Because I knew scholarships for undocumented students were extremely competitive. I knew that I had to stand out. I knew that if I wasn't absolutely perfect, then it could mean I wasn't going to be able to get, the scholarships that I needed to be able to go to college. And so that environment, and I could even talk to you all a whole hour about what it was like my senior year and trying to navigate that environment and all the feelings and the mental health aspect of it. That could be a whole session, but just kind of bringing it back into this language of the deservingness, we should ensure that all of our students feel that they're deserving of everything, just as everyone else. And so now, just to kind of, I guess, close up the immigration language, everyone has a status, right? So some examples, you could be a US citizen, temporary protected status. So when I was mentioning TPS earlier, that's what that means. You could be a DACA recipient. So that's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which, like I mentioned, a lot of our youth currently hold DACA status. Or you could be part of a mixed status family, like I had also mentioned earlier, where you are a US citizen, maybe your students are US citizens, but their parents are undocumented. So that would be an example of a mixed status family. And to give some context as to how behind we are in sort of bringing all of the rights that immigrants deserve to immigrants in our country, although Indigenous people's roots are core to the creation of the US, they were actually not provided citizenship until Congress passed the Indian Citizenship Act in 1924. And it was even longer after that before they received the right to vote. So despite being considered citizens, still could not vote. And that just kind of puts into perspective that this is an ongoing battle. Like, if we want our students to feel like their families and their existence in our country matters, we have to continue to push for legislation that's going to make them feel that way, right? And so that's why all of you, please vote. It's very important. And I think you being on this call already lets me know you're trying and you want to be an ally. So we want to make sure y'all get to the ballot. Okay, so now I actually only have one case study for you all because of time, but I really want us to dig into it, and I'm really excited for it. And so what I'm actually going to do, I think it's really, I don't know if I can share my audio through Zoom. So I am going to place this link in our group chat, and that way everyone can watch it, and I will give everyone the next 5 minutes to watch it. It's only 3 minutes long, but I'd love for you all to watch this video. And as you're watching the video, just kind of take notes or just think about like what you're seeing, how it makes you feel, what are some things you notice, in the way that folks are reacting and the way that folks are feeling as they're talking about their status. So let's just all watch this now, and we will circle back in 5 minutes. All right, so I think we can all come back together now. I hope I'm not interrupting anyone who is in a really good thought process. Definitely finish your thoughts out. But yeah, so now we're looking at this chart, right? So what makes a good ally? Definitely compassion, right? So thank them for trusting you, express that you are a supportive confidant. Making sure, again, going back to my story, just the fact that Miss Medina knew our story and knew that my parents weren't documented, and made my brother and I feel so seen and so supported and so validated, and just made me feel like my existence mattered in her classroom. That's what made all the difference, right? So making sure that you are intentional about the visibility of all of your students, but really ensuring that your students of color, your students with disabilities, your undocumented students, if you have students in through the DSS system, anything like that, like you definitely want to go that extra mile of making sure they feel just as validated and seen and really truly um, seen, and that will make all the difference in your classroom or in your school. If you're a principal, if you're a counselor, you're in your space, just making that a true safe space. An assessment, right? So what do they need from you? Why are they coming to you? Maybe you are the counselor. Sorry, y'all, I have kids on my house. But so maybe you are the counselor, right? And maybe what they need from you is they're trying to apply for a scholarship and they didn't know that they needed a social security. So now they're confused about what scholarships they are eligible for or not eligible for. A lot of undocumented students or a lot of children of undocumented parents were not familiar, our families are not familiar with the US education system. So it takes a lot for us to be able to navigate the system just from what is ESL, like how is my student going to learn English? When I remember our teachers would come home do home visits over the summers, and that's where my mom asked all her questions, but if your school doesn't have that, then how can you make sure that all of your parents who perhaps this is their first time going through the US education system are understanding what the expectations are of them as the parents and of your students, and what is after school programming, right? And what if they're not signing their students up for it because they don't actually know how it works? They have questions about, how is my kid going to get home? Do they have to come home on the bus? Will I have to go pick them up? So just thinking through these scenarios of, wow, well, maybe some of my students' parents just don't know, right? And so what do they need from you? What information or referral can you provide them of potential, maybe even resources that they need to be connected with, so that you can help fill in those gaps, and again, yet bring another layer of support to that family and to your students. When it comes to resources, I think there's, again, like I had mentioned, there's a lot you can do, and there's also a lot that is already out there, right? So things that you can do, you can learn about the legislation. Those are, things that you can do from your home in your free time, while you're just hanging out with, over the weekend, and you're like, maybe I should look up some of this information and understand it better. I don't actually know how DACA works. I don't actually know what it means that my student says everything in their house is under their older sibling's name. That's the case for a lot of these families where the DACA holder in the family who has a social, who has the license, all of the vehicles are under that person's name, right? So now that DACA has been in threat for months in the Supreme Court, and all of that was happening with the Trump administration, what were your students going through, and seeing their parents nervous about all of this, and seeing their older sibling nervous about all of this if you're working with younger students, right? So just kind of understanding what are the realities that my student's family is facing. I think that's what really makes students feel like, wow, this person genuinely cares about me, because they're trying to understand why my mom can't drive late at night, and that's why I can't be on the soccer team at the school, even though I'm the best player at the school, So these are realities. So you want to make sure that you're not, like, I read a really great comment in the chat section that said, don't just assume things. Yeah, because, our students are facing a lot of things that sometimes are not even thinkable to us because we've never been exposed to them. And so going the extra mile is the last step of making a really good ally, right? So how can you ensure that your job is done? How can you ensure, someone said it in the comment section too, just teaching to the best of your ability and not making assumptions. Going that extra mile makes all the difference. And it really does. I think that students are really impressionable and really perceptive as well of understanding when adults are genuinely trying, and genuinely want to support them. And I know there's a really great actually there's a really great session that I recommend to all of you. It's called the Student Six with Greg Meyer and Bonnie, I believe her last name is Davis. And I was a part of that as well. So just kind of learning what are some strategies that you can implement in your office space, your classroom space, to support students of color, low income students, students of LGBTQ parents who perhaps feel like they're being pushed aside because of perceptions of social perception or things of that nature. So there's a lot of really great content out there, so that's part of, again, like, what resources can you utilize for yourself to teach yourself, but then also what can you bring to the table and take those resources to genuinely take action and support your students. And so to close, I'm gonna, again, in the chat box, share the link to this really great case study that we put together. And I would love I'll read it out loud, but you all can also have it to read on your own. So we watched the video, right? And now we're doing this case study. So based on what you learned today about supporting undocumented youth, let's collaborate on what would be the best way to support this student within your role. And I'd love for people to post things in the chat box as you're kind of thinking through this. And this could be for all of you, no matter what position you hold. If you just read it as it is, interpret it in your role and how you could support the student if the student was coming to you. So Remy is a 9th grade student at Jordan High School and the vice president of the school's National Honor Society. She approaches you wanting to speak with you urgently and appears in distress. She asks to speak with you in private. Remy tells you that her parents are refusing to let her participate in the annual trip to Washington, D.C. Remy tells you that she is undocumented and that her parents are scared that she will be detained and deported while in D.C. They told her that museums and government buildings are dangerous places for people like her, especially because of the heightened security and numerous ID checkpoints. Remy is devastated. She worked incredibly hard to be part of the Honor Society and to assume this position of leadership at your school. Now she feels like she's being punished instead of rewarded for her hard work. How would you help Remy navigate the situation with her family? Let's start there. And I'll pull up the chat box because it just disappeared on me. Oh, there we go, I found it. Okay, great. So I'll give y'all a couple minutes to just kind of think through it. Maybe we start with, what would step one be? What does someone feel like step one would be in helping Remy navigate this situation? Validate her concerns. That's a really great starting point. So letting her know, I do understand that being undocumented is really challenging for this trip with your family, or your parents feel this could be really challenging for you in this trip. How can I support you? What is something that we can work out together? Or what would you, maybe we ask a student, what would you like to see happen? What would you like to do about this? Or how can I help you? So validating her concerns and maybe drawing out a startup plan. What would be another great stepping stone or another point that we could do in this case? So this Autumn is very active. Love it. Thank you, Autumn. Would it be helpful to firsthand reach out to all of the places, museums, etc., that she would be going to see how they would handle this while keeping everything anonymous? I think that that's actually a great point. I also think that there are so many organizations now, thankfully, that are advocating for immigrant rights. And it would be really great to reach out to them, and kind of see, like, have you ever seen anything like this happen? Like, if a student's on a field trip? Do we know if they would be at risk in these buildings? And I also think it's important to note that undocumented folks are totally entitled to lobby. I lobbied all of my college, I guess, journey. I lobbied in DC all the time, especially during the time that the DREAM Act was up for as a proposal in the Senate, and there were all these other bills out there. So there actually is a really low likelihood that Remy would be taken, especially on a school trip. I think would be important to ask as we're calling these museums is, what do you require of our students to enter these buildings, right? So does she need a passport from her country of origin? Does it matter does she have to have a US ID? I think that is kind of a really good starting point, is just asking what is it that she needs. And someone said, Francis basically hit the nail, saying do some research on how the trip is structured. Most ninth graders don't have IDs regardless of documentation status, so that might be something to offer to share with parents. That's exactly right. I will say that a lot of undocumented families though do get passports from their origin countries for their children, because I know for us, like my mom, she did that since we were little kids, just in case. Like she was always told we needed to have a form of ID, and that was the only thing we could get, was that in like consulate cards. So we always carried those on us. But it's true, a lot of ninth graders don't have, typically have ID. So that would be something really important to share with the parents. If you call the museums and they say, well, we don't even need to see IDs for underage students, we just need to see the teachers' IDs or the coordinators' IDs that are coordinating the trip, maybe that's something they say, right? Ask if she wants help talking to her parents so you can share all of this and hopefully help alleviate their understandable concerns. That is absolutely something to offer Remy, right? You don't want to just do it and assume that it was okay for her to maybe even talk about this with you, because maybe her parents told her that they didn't really want her to talk to anyone about it, and maybe she just wanted to express how she was feeling to you, but she doesn't feel comfortable with you approaching her parents about their status. And that is something you definitely want to know before just kind of running with it, And I will say that this is a very common actual scenario. I faced something similar in middle school though, because in middle school, I'm actually trilingual, so I speak French fluently, and I studied French. My mom would put me in like the immersion summer camps, and through a mentoring program I was in all summers. And so I learned it really well. And my 8th grade year, my school was taking a trip to France. And I even up to then, for a moment, I thought maybe if I'm going through my school, like I'll be able to go, even though I knew I was undocumented. And my teacher, when I told her I couldn't go because I talked about it with my parents, tried to say like, what do you need? What if I talk to them? Maybe there's a way we can make this work. I don't know anything about this. And I quickly just said, no, I don't actually want you to talk to my parents about it, because I know that they were already like really sad, like to tell me that I couldn't go, and I don't want them to feel even worse because I know I can't go. And so, just kind of making sure that you're also giving the student autonomy, because again, Remy is a 9th grader, right? I was an 8th grader and could communicate that. So we want to give the students autonomy. If this was maybe a 3rd grader, maybe it would look a little different, but because when we're now in a stage where a 9th grader is more aware, you definitely want to make sure we're doing what the student is comfortable with as well. Maybe all the group on the trip could wear special t-shirts to identify with the group. It shows belonging and less likely should be in danger of being stopped. Yeah, I mean, these are all really great ideas. I think that something like that would probably make Remy feel very much validated, in the sense of she approached you about it, and you're going again the extra mile to try to make her feel, like she's going to be okay. But definitely all of these things together would be a really good starting point for this kind of scenario, right? So making sure we're asking her how to support her, validating her concerns, not making her feel like, oh, that's just so unreasonable. There's no way they'd come get you like at one of these public places. But also understanding that that's extremely unlikely. You just don't want to make her or her parents seem like silly for assuming that, right? And just kind of understanding to reaching out to groups that do this work and saying, hey, is this possible? Like, is this likely? And if you want to go that extra mile, that's part of it too, right? Doing your research. Someone said, however, if it's too risky, we can still find creative ways to celebrate our students and make them feel seen and valued. That's super important. Let's say Remy doesn't end up going, right? So perhaps recording parts of the trip and then sharing with Remy when the class gets back. I think if parents are not comfortable, we should respect that and be compassionate with our students and families. Absolutely. So that was kind of my next go-to. So let's say that, you know, despite your efforts of trying to make the family feel comfortable with it and of trying to, and doing all your research and reaching out to groups, her parents are still like, no, we just really are not comfortable with it. That is something we must absolutely respect, because, you know, everyone knows best for their children, and her parents are just equally as important in this scenario as Remy. And doing your best and finding these creative ways to celebrate all of the students and making Remy feel valued and seen, super important, right? So maybe on that day where folks are going to the trip, and there's sometimes even several students that don't end up going on the trip, maybe though there's an alternate trip for these students where, you know, they don't go to DC, but they go to the local planetarium. They learn some of the same things that some of your students are learning in DC at a different museum, right? Virtual field trips are awesome too. You can do a little bit of that, but then also maybe something super active. You can absolutely video chat during the trip. I think that would make a lot of the students who, maybe there's other students as well who don't end up going, they would all feel more included. And so that's my point. I think our point here is that you all are amazing in the work that you do, and you know how to navigate these situations. And now that you're also aware of the language and the importance of making your students feel seen and valued, and making students who not just assuming, you know, Remy isn't going because you know, her parents just don't feel like paying for it, or maybe her parents are just don't want her to go on this field trip, or she just misses school that day and doesn't tell anyone. You don't want to just assume, oh, well, like, why would her parents do that? Like, you taking the time to understand what is really happening in each of our students, like, you know, the realities they're facing outside of the classroom is so important to understanding what access they have to some of the different things that other students can easily do. So that's kind of the reflection piece. We don't have to talk about this, but just kind of thinking of how different your methods of support would be for a student who's undocumented versus, like Remy, versus a student who is documented, right? With a student who's documented, you can talk to the family and just say, you know, what's going on? Like, what, you know, why Remy expressed there's hesitation to letting her go on the trip. You know, is it because of, you know, money, or is it because of, or is there a prior commitment that day? You know, it's easier to approach that situation with a student who's documented, and it looks a lot different. There are a lot of different barriers for a student who is undocumented. So just kind of thinking about that oftentimes our undocumented students are facing things that are out of our immediate thought processes because we haven't been exposed to those situations. Great, y'all did awesome. So I'll head back over here. And I am now opening it up for questions, and almost a couple minutes late, but still almost on time. So thank you all so much for having me today. And I think, Corinne, do you want to take over here, or did you want me to facilitate questions?
If I can figure out how to navigate Zoom in a minute.
Should I stop sharing my screen?
No, I just couldn't. I lost myself there for a minute. Great. So we did have a question. Oh, we have a question. Autumn, go ahead and ask yours. And there was, it was from Autumn. She asked earlier, is it appreciated to speak Spanish rather than English when you can, even if you still are not anywhere near fluent?
I would say yes, it just depends on what you're communicating. So if it's like casual, conversation and you're just trying to say like, hello, like, ¿cómo están? Like, how are you? And it's something like that, then it's total. I think a lot of parents appreciate that. It's more so when you're trying to communicate more like important information that's hard to understand because you're not actually fluent. That's when it's a little difficult. And I don't think parents necessarily, it's not that they don't appreciate it, but I'm sure they'd rather have like an actual interpreter or someone to communicate important information. But yes, absolutely. I always say like a really great way to make students feel seen even is understanding some of the holidays that they celebrate that you don't celebrate. And doing that with all your students. Like, what is something your family does at home to celebrate that maybe other students in our classroom don't do, and incorporating that into your classroom some way, somehow. So that's part of, again, like I mentioned, the Student 6 programming training, which is also incredible. And learning from that is great as well.
Great, thank you. Autumn, did you have another question? Feel free to put it in the chat. Francis, go ahead and put your question in as well. Okay, great. So we answered that question about the Spanish. Francis, if anyone else has a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Don't be shy.
I have a question.
Sure.
What are some of the organizations that were mentioned that we can go to support undocumented students in the community? So like, where are some of the go-to places, maybe in North Carolina, or organizations in North Carolina that we could then connect with resources?
That is an amazing question. So there are actually several across the state, so depending on the region. So for students, I don't know if there's anyone here that are all the way out towards the mountain area. I don't actually remember the organization name for that, but I will send the graphic over. It's like almost even, I think it might even be in a map, but I know Comunidad Colectiva is in Charlotte, and they were recently featured actually somewhere for doing rapid response work, which is now, it's essentially what this work is called. Rapid response work is all about building self-protecting communities for undocumented populations across our state. So if there's ICE presence anywhere, there's a hotline they can call. Anyone can call to alert, like there's a checkpoint here, or there's ICE was spotted here. And then there are verifiers that are trained to go verify that presence. Once it's verified, the community will know at large, and they're just massive networks of communication. So Siembra NC does a lot of this work, amazing work throughout the entire state, in a lot of different regions of North Carolina. Apoyo NC is the organization that I founded that does this work in the Orange County area. Then there's Raleigh. I can't actually remember the Raleigh organization's name, but I will definitely send that graphic over to Corinne, so she's totally welcome to share it across whoever wants it. But if you want to Google it, it's called Rapid Response Work. And so that's what it's called. And a lot of these grassroots orgs have been featured in a lot of articles, so they should just pop up.
Linda had a question, which was how would you recommend going about encouraging families to come to school events? I know sometimes it is because of work schedules, family issues, but she'd love any input that you have.
This is a great question. I think letting families know that there will be interpretation at all of these events is like super important. If you are able to get childcare services for them, another thing that's super important. That's oftentimes the two things that discourage so many families from going. Like, I know at my high school, my mom never wanted to go to our like the orientation events with me, because she was like, you're just going to interpret them for me when we get home. Like, you're not even going to be able to do that while we're there. Like, I'm just going to be sitting there not understanding. Like, she would go, but she would feel like, why am I here? I don't understand any of it. Ruby's the one taking all the notes, and when we get home, she's just going to tell me what I need to do, right? So if there, and I remember just feeling like, if there was just an interpreter here, this would solve that issue, right off the bat. And a lot more parents would be open to going to these events if they felt like they would actually be able to participate or understand. I think that's a really big thing about school events. And then also, it's helpful to kind of build a community of parents that are active because they motivate the other parents. That's a really big thing. Our community is very much motivated by like each other. So when there's like a group of parents that are like, oh, did you hear there's this happening at the school? Like we should just all go, let's go and bring food, you know, and like they're like, oh yeah, let's all bring food, let's make it a potluck. And then they do it, you know, they just do it. It's amazing to watch it happen. But yeah, there's a lot of different factors that can influence parents to come. And someone just said everything. Yeah, the interpreter, food, childcare, and having like just clearly letting parents know that these services will be available is crucial, because if they for a second think there's not going to be an interpreter, it's really unlikely that they'll come.
Sorry, I know we're over time, so I don't want to keep you, but I do have a question. So I am a college advisor, so I work with students who are in their last year or two of high school, planning out their steps, and I struggle a lot more in assisting those students, like you mentioned, who aren't the like high achieving students who can whatever, like get into Carolina or get that big scholarship. So I struggle to like strike the balance between being hopeful and being honest, and also not having all the answers, and also like wanting to assist however I can. So I was wondering if you had any ideas.
Yes. Yeah, it's really hard to support. Like I mentioned, that's why we're trying to move away from that narrative, right? Because there aren't a lot of scholarships open for undocumented students unless they are in that top like 15%, right, of students. And so for students who are not meeting that like ultimate threshold, I think it's important to have a plan to help them feel like there's a plan that they're working towards. So whether it is that they do have to go to, you know, community college and boost their resumes, or maybe it's you go into the workforce, but you're not just going to go, you know, we're going to do a lot of professional development work and sign you up and get you to understand the importance of that, so that when you reapply, your resume is now looking very different. It's a lot about helping them build that confidence and kind of helping them feel like they have goals set forward so that they can work on those to getting to their ultimate goal. You know, and even with community college, I know there's a lot of like Durham Tech has a great program for their undocumented students. So having that kind of research ahead of time of which community colleges across our state have these open ended resources is really important, so that, you know, students don't feel like, oh, well, I'm just going to go here, and then they get lost once they get there. So again, just about planning and helping them find those goals. And then also learning from them, I think, like what motivates you. Like it's important to understand like what your students feel motivated by, if they do lack a lot of motivation. And that is really common with undocumented students who are at this point, like where you're saying, where they're not at the top 15%. And I would say I saw that with my own friends. I had a lot of friends that said, well, if you don't even know if you're going to be able to go to college, like there's no hope for me, you know. And that's a very like true reality. So helping them kind of figure out what is that motivating factor and what is going to help like you self-push and self-build and and help you become a little bit more resilient and figure out what your goals and plans are. Even that goes a really long way in helping students feel like they can be successful and getting them a little bit more motivated. I hope that was helpful. I need to plug my computer in, it's gonna die.
Yeah, it's been a while. Also, I just want to make a note that the UNC-DUKE Consortium offers, I'm going to take away power from Ruby. Sorry, Ruby. We offer some documentaries through our film library that are really great for providing some kind of insight into more of how students might feel. I'm lost on, okay. On how students might feel. They're called Papers, the Stories of Undocumented Youth, which is really fantastic. And there's another one called La Escuela, which follows a girl who is a migrant. She's a part of a migrant family, and it kind of provides some insight into how students feel when they're kind of they don't really have college as an option the same as other students. So you can check that out on our consortium website. We have kind of links to the film library, and we also have a whole book set about Latin American immigration that provides some insight as well into, you know, kind of the stories of students who are coming here from Latin America, documented and undocumented, or who is separated by family. You can also check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for book and film recommendations as well. I do want to encourage everyone to continue this conversation this afternoon at 2 p.m. We have our Latina immigrant and student panel discussion. We'll also have students who are just like Ruby. They came from Latin America to the United States, to North Carolina, went through the public school system in North Carolina, and they're now UNC undergrads, and they're going to speak about their experiences, the pros and the cons of coming up through the North Carolina school system. So it should be very impactful. That's today at 2. And to get a certificate of completion, I stuck this in the chat, but please visit go.unc.edu/undocumented youth to get a certificate so you can get your CEUs. I think that's it. Thank you so much, Ruby. That was amazing. I'll send out the presentation as well, which has some contact information, and we'll send out a lot of things that were mentioned today in the panel. But thank you all so much for being here, and hope to see you this afternoon as well.